A very warm welcome to this World Game Changers podcast, where your host, Paul D. Lowe, embraces many crucial conversations that compassionately contribute towards creating a better life and world. Paul's intention's very simple: to help get people's inspirational insights and motivational messages out into the world, so others may benefit.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this World Game Changers podcast episode. I've got a returning guest, a lady by the name of Rosemary Cunningham from Leigh-on-Sea in Essex. Rosemary, welcome back.
Thank you, Paul. Nice to be here, talking about another subject close to my heart.
Yep, and what this one's about, listeners, is we thought we'd talk about the broad topic of soulful leaders. Now, Rosemary's going to be a bit more specific than that, but I just want to introduce this concept called soulful leaders. It's something you're going to be hearing quite a lot about in the forthcoming, in the near future and beyond. So, in many respects, Rosemary, you are the first under this new banner, this new exciting banner. I'm not going to give too much away at this stage, listeners, but watch this space, or should I say, listen to this space. So, soulful leaders. Rosemary, on that broad platform, where are you going to take us? What, more specifically, what do you want to talk about and share with us?
Wow, soulful leaders. Okay. So I work with heart-centered business owners, and I think we're all leaders. And heart-centered means that you're not just led by financial gain. It's a necessary part of business, of course, but first motivator is normally to make a difference and be much more heart-led. And I think we're completely rewriting all the rules around business at the moment. I think everything's up for change, everything's up for renegotiation, particularly people who are starting their own businesses. We don't have to follow any rules, we just make our own, don't we, and find out what works and cherry pick and magpie from other people and see what comes from our soul, really. Tune into ourselves to be capable of being quiet and listening to our soul for guidance. That's certainly what I do. That's how I work with my business. That's when I'm most effective.
Get in touch with ourselves. We spoke in a previous episode, didn't we, around this whole thing about relationships and getting in touch with ourselves first. And this is very much, listening to you speak here, Rosemary, very much aligned with that. I want to quote something that I've quoted this many times before, listeners, and it kind of ties in with what Rosemary said there. And this is from many moons ago, from my own point of view. I can't remember who actually said it, but anyway, and it's this: the object of a business is not to make money. The object of a business is to serve its people well. The result is to make money. And I think that kind of sums things up, Rosemary, does it not? That, certainly from business and in life in general, people are so focused on the end goal. You must win at all costs. You must turn a profit. You must do this. The bottom line, the bottom line, the bottom line. I agree with you. I think that there's a shift. There's a big shift, not just in finance and business, but in life in general. And it's more about service now, isn't it? Because people are waking up to the fact that actually, do you know what? I'm having the wool pulled over my eyes here. And I'm not really valued. I'm just being sold to and talked at. And I think people have had enough. Any thoughts around that?
Yes, definitely. I think we have a lot more choice now, don't we? We have, with the internet, we have multiple choices on just about everything we choose to purchase. And we can either buy on price, or we can buy on ethics, or a combination of all of them, and looking at many different factors. And I think the world is encouraging us to do that as well.
Yeah, Very much so. Very much so. So, just picking up this relationship strand, this theme, we have a relationship with money, don't we?
We certainly do. Yes.
Yeah. Any? Do you want to share one or two kind of different thoughts around that? I know we've spoken off here, Rosemary, and it might be useful to share that. And one or two of your thoughts around different thoughts that people may or may not have around our relationship with money.
Well, we can all be very, very different, and we all have different motivators, and a lot of it comes from when we're very small, what we were taught about money and self-worth. And one of the examples I always go back to is if you're a little child and you want an ice cream and you say, Mummy, can I have an ice cream? And Mummy says, well, have you been a good boy, Paul? And I don't think you've been a good boy. And good boys don't, if you haven't been a good boy, you don't get ice cream. It's like Father Christmas, isn't it? So you're taught that if you're not good, you don't get what you want. And if you ask for it, you'll probably get rejected, which as an empath can be very, very painful.
Yeah.
And then that can make asking for what we want all the way down the line in life can be really, really challenging. And that can be from asking for a wage increase or for asking someone to repay us the money they owe us, or asking for a discount, or that's just one aspect. But it does. When I work with women, we always look at your money story, which is what was being modelled to you around money and self-worth, particularly when you were very, very small, so between the age of 0 and 8. And looking at those old memories and what you were told, that, and the amount of people who've been told that rich people can't be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, someone quite recently who was working with me said her mother used to say, well, they've got big houses, they're criminals. And our parents are our first God, so what they say, oh my goodness. And the general default when you're really young is to believe.
Yeah.
And maybe not so much now, but certainly children were taught to believe what they were told and not question it.
Yeah.
Back in the day, weren't they? Less so now. Less so now. But yeah, everyone's very different. And I do money archetype work, so I get someone to answer about 80 questions, I think it is, all about you and your attitude, giving and wealth, and asking for what you want and whether you give it away, whether you hold it all tight. And from that, there are the system I use, the sacred money archetypes. There are 8 different archetypes, and we look at the top 3 in yours. The 3 highest scores are the 3 aspects of your money personality, and then we look at the lowest one, because there's a bit of each in all of us. And the lowest one tells us where we're ignoring things. And the top 3 are the 3 different aspects of you, and they can actually be fighting each other. One of them wants to keep money really close and not spend it, whereas the other one maybe wants to take a lot of risks. And it can almost be as if you're having an internal battle about what's right and what's doable and what's acceptable and what's safe.
Is there a lesson for us there, Rosemary? Not just in the specific context, but we're brought up in a very polarized world where either or, black or white, this or that. But I think there again, from my own experience of what's unfolding, the world's mellowing, and that stark polarization of A or Z, you can only have one choice. I think that's on its way out. And there's this much more kind of hybrid of, well, actually, why can't I have both? Why must I always choose between X or Y or A or B or whatever? And, can you resonate with that? Is there a softening of the energy in today's world, albeit slowly?
I think there is, yeah, because I can remember having a friend who was a primary school teacher back in the late 80s, actually, when I was still doing my nurse training. And she said they were teaching the children that there was no right answer. Here's the question, but there are many different possibilities. So let's discuss the possibilities. Whereas when I was at school, it was just there was right and there was wrong.
Yeah.
And but it's also what we model to our children, isn't it? If you've been taught that it's right or wrong, and that's what was imprinted on you when you were 5, then you may still be teaching your kids the same thing, unless you've had a different kind of education or you've done a lot of personal development work. And of course, a bit like money, how you bring up your kids can also be a big friction point in families, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. What's triggered there as you were speaking, Rosemary, is right when I was brought up in a kid, children should be seen and not heard. Big boys don't cry, only girls cry. And the other one was boys like us go to prison, not university.
Oh, wow. Goodness,
yeah. I mean, that's I come from a sort of rough inner city council estate of Nottingham. I'm very, very proud of those humble roots, but those are some of the founding, we spoke in a previous episode, didn't we, about founding beliefs from that age of around from 3 till kind of 6, so roughly there's different thoughts around which model we use, but in those early stages, irrespective, and that was very, very interesting. Yeah, money's the root of all evil. Well, okay, it's an energy, isn't it? And it's how we use it. A knife is a beautiful thing for spreading butter, but put in the wrong hands, it's a lethal thing as well.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Yes, and I think the idea of scarcity and sufficiency is also a very, very powerful one, and this goes back to economics. You look back at the sort of the Adam Smith economics, which our economy is based on. It was that it's only a limited amount of money, and I think then it was the gold standard. And could be wrong there, but I know there was the gold standard, where apparently a country only made enough money to match how much gold it had, which of course that has nothing to do with what happens now at all. But we've still got that training that there's a pie, and if Paul's got this much, 25%, and Rosemary's got 15%, if Rosemary's portion goes up to 20%, Paul's has to go down to 20% as well. And that's what we've been taught, and that's what also imprinted on us around absolutely everything. Even love, you can only really love one person, that kind of thing. What our church teachings keep people controlled, wasn't it? You could only marry one person. And there's a fascinating book by a woman called Lynn Twist called The Soul of Money, and she used to work for I think she founded the Hunger Project, actually, and he talks about the concepts of sufficiency and scarcity and the myth of scarcity and what it's based on. Anyone wants to go and really research this stuff, it's an easy read. It's got lots of stories in there of different people in different countries. It's well worth looking at.
So, soulful leaders, like you've already said, Rosemary, you do work. You do a lot of work with female clients, particularly. But this whole concept of soulful, when I say those two words to you, soulful leader, what does it stir within you? What's your, what would be your definition of a soulful leader?
I think it's the opposite to what we're the patriarchy, really. At the moment, looking out at the way Mr. Trudeau's treating people in Canada, that is not soulful leadership, as far as I'm concerned. And soulful leadership is listening to people, hearing their concerns, treating people with kindness, consideration, allowing people to have their say and to be heard, which hasn't been traditionally the case in the world. And soulful leadership is leading the way from a heart place where the first motivation, I think, is service, rather than holding on to your piece of the pie so nobody else can have any. And I think this is the other thing about working with women. It said that women will hold back a lot. They will give more money from their earnings. They'll put it back into their community. They'll give more to charity, and they will support other people who are up and coming more as well. That is a female way of working. And it's quite interesting. Somebody's just put on Facebook a picture of the leaders who are talking about the arms situation in Munich right now, and they are all white and male around a big table. There must be 30 men around this table, and they are all white and male. Now, there isn't anyone of colour there. It's quite crazy in this day and age when there's so many more women in business and politics, and they're just not represented at all. It's still out there, and I think it can rub off. Now, obviously, men can be very soulful leaders as well, but I think it's a divine feminine quality, and of being conciliatory and just involving others. It's really interesting. There's an organisation called Eve, which is a female angel investment company, and I talked to the founder, a lady called Harveen, a few weeks ago, and she said women actually investing in businesses is very, very small, and it's partly because it's such a patriarchal structure in investment at the moment, and women like to invest in a much more collaborative way. They like to do it in groups. They like to ask a lot more questions. And that is not how the system of investment exists at the moment. It's another area that is still in a very patriarchal structure. And she said nothing's going to change until that structure changes. And this was really interesting from a woman who is an investor.
Yeah. The old model, the old God. We've always done it this way, listeners, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the cliches go on, and the cliches roll.
Excuse me. Yes, of course, what often comes up is another organisation which does something similar in a different way. Comes up through entrepreneurs, doesn't it? And they start doing a good job through a very different structure. And I think that's what will happen ultimately. And that will be those heart-centered leaders. And there's a huge amount of people coming out of banking at the moment. I had met a woman last year who'd had a bit of a spiritual awakening, and she's working in an investment bank, and she got this download that she really needed to start helping the whole face of banking change, but of course she had no idea where to start. And yes, and people are wakening up all over the place, desperately wanting to change these systems, and of course bit by bit they will.
Yeah. Let me ask you a massive question, Rosemary, a massive question. Now, I'm making an assumption, and of course we should never make assumptions, listeners, but I'm going to make one. Host's prerogative and all that. And I'm going to assume, Rosemary, that roughly speaking, you and I are around the same age. And the reason I say that, irrespective of what the figure is, the question is this. Do you think we will see peace in our lifetime? World peace.
Peace on earth, peace, no more wars, peace.
Well, that's a massive general question, isn't it? Because what defines world peace? One might argue, well, there's no war going on, or there's no world war, like the conventional warfare, so there's none of that going off. That we know about. That's another topic altogether. People are going to have different definitions of those two words, world peace. 10 letters, 2 words, world peace. But, for me, it starts with that inner peace on a very relatively micro level. And then that compounding effect, to use a financial term, of 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. So there's a reason I asked that, Rosemary, and as I say, so the semi-apologies almost for asking such an ambiguous question, because it's so subjective on so many levels. But I just want to throw it out there as a starter for 10.
Well, said that the big changes are going on between 2012 and 2032. It's now 2022, so we're halfway through. Apparently 2 billion people woke up in the last 18 months, woke up spiritually. They might not know it yet, but they're looking for a very different way of being, and they're questioning. I don't know. It's forecast that between about now and 2032, maybe 2050, the world will completely change, and I think we're on a very, very fast trajectory for that.
Yeah.
I don't know how it'll happen. Looking around this week, it looks a bit distant, but I look at other things that have happened in our lifetime. I was hearing this week some of the laws Margaret Thatcher put into place about schools not being able to discuss anything to do with being gay. That was put into statute when Margaret Thatcher was in power in, I think, the maybe late 80s, early 90s, and then Tony Blair came in and he put in all the different laws about civil partnerships, and then gay marriage came, and all the things that were completely inconceivable and totally illegal in your and my lifetime. And so, you know what? I don't know. It seems quite unlikely at the moment, but why not? I'm up for all possibilities, and I've done something today that I wouldn't normally have done. I've done an activation for people in a very public forum, and people who I didn't know would come in and have actually done it. And really, it was quite a spiritual thing that I've put out there in the public domain, and more of these things are getting picked up, and I'm seeing a lot more men and women in my life being much more curious about living a very different way and having a more peaceful existence. Yeah, why not? Let's set the goal, shall we, Paul?
Absolutely. And the reason I asked that, Rosemary, and I really smiled there when you said 2032, and I'll tell you why. Because I had a conversation with one of the World Game Changers patrons, a gentleman who lives in Denmark called Lars Heiselberg van Jensen. And Lars has been on previous podcasts and in books and what have you. And what an amazing soul he is, because he's the guy that co-founded the Growing Trees Network Foundation, and they're planting immeasurable numbers of trees and forests around the world. And 2 years ago, New Year's Day, Lars rang me to wish me the obligatory Happy New Year and all that kind of stuff. And we got talking, as is always. And he said, Paul, now Lars is, I'm kind of saying, around the same age. And he said, do you ever think we'll see peace in our lifetime? And intuitively, instinctively, Rosemary, it was a categoric yes. Do you ever have one of those situations where you answer something and then you like a millisecond later think, wow, what did I just say? Where did that come from? It was one of those. It was a categoric yes. And, that was 2 years ago, 2 years ago. And I've had a conversation with Lars in the last few days, the last couple of weeks. And he's, we always talk about that, that fateful day, the significance of it. And he said, Paul, I want to challenge you now on that, on that fateful conversation. Put a date on it. Put some, some structure around it. Okay. And trusting intuition, I asked a very, very, very close friend of mine, and I just put the question to her. Just give me, in your thoughts, in your mind, your heart, more importantly, when will that day kick in? If one would assume yet again, there's not going to be. It's not like flipping a light switch where one day, the lights off, and the very next day it's on. One wouldn't assume it'd be that way. But what's interesting, Rosemary, is she said 11 years from now, which will take us up to 2033. And that's why I smiled when you said, what you quoted, up to 2032. Because I really do believe, and not from a headspace perspective, but in my heart and intuition, that the world's heading in that direction, despite, as you say quite rightly, Rosemary, whatever is happening today. But one or two cliches have been flown around today, particularly from myself. Well, here's another one, listeners, because apparently we shouldn't use cliches. Well, podcasters shouldn't anyway, but this one is, it's always darkest before the dawn.
Another thing comes to mind, though, Paul. I was brought up in quite a churchy family, and they was about heaven and hell. And basically, it was that some people don't want a peaceful life, and it's their prerogative not to have one. So they will go somewhere where they can continue to what they want with each other. That's what the traditional idea of hell was, wasn't it? And it certainly was. It wasn't as if it was a punishment. It was, you go where you want to go, so you go where you're matched. Energetically, you go where you're matched. And I've got a colleague at the moment who's so scared that millions of people are going to die because all the energy is ascending and people aren't going to change. And well, it's going to be different generations anyway. But my honest feeling, I think there's always going to be people who aren't interested in that. They want a different way of being. Maybe it's part of their progress. And there will have to be some sort of, there will always be that. And there will be, we talk about dual timelines, don't we? And we existing in multi-dimensions. Apparently we all exist in multi-dimensions, and there could be a dimension where people carry on warring, whereas in another one they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's one thing for sure that, however, people define what life is, or what, where they stand, or what perspective they have. I think there's one thing that we can all agree on, if not the detail of it: the world is changing. The world is changing. And in my humble opinion, despite all the darkness that still prevails, the world is changing for the better.
Yes, I'd agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, watch this space. So I want to kind of leave it for you to have the last word, Rosemary, around this soulful leader thing. But before I do that, I want to invite you into sharing contact details with us, how people can reach out. As you said, you do work with women in particular. I mean, do you ever work with guys at all, or is it exclusively women?
I do work with guys occasionally. When I work with a woman, often, not often, but sometimes there's this thing, well, what's the point of me sorting my money stuff out? It's his fault or it's her fault. Yeah. And one lady came and worked with me, and she knew that it would really help her partner to just come and do a basic hour with me and really start to understand his money personality. And it turned out they were very similar. They were both connector archetypes, and connectors don't like managing the money. They love someone else to do it for them. And they were both that. So she wanted him to help out because it was her home, and he'd moved in because she was older than him, and he just wanted to pay rent and didn't want any responsibility at all. And eventually they sat there and they looked at their different money personalities together, and she said they couldn't talk about money at all. As two sensitive people, it was so painful, and they just end up in really frightening situations which threatened their relationship. And after that, there was this recognition of why they struggled with it, and from then on they were able to work together, respect each other's boundaries, and they started a business together, a small business. Apparently the following day they went and opened a bank account together.
Wow.
Yeah, so I don't often. I'm open to it, and particularly, I'm open to it, but it doesn't happen very often. But where people can find me, my name is Rosemary with a Y Cunningham, and my website is rosemarycunningham.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn. I offer one-to-one coaching. I offer money courses. Sometimes they're group money courses, because money's a wonderful thing to work on in a group, because you and I might be very different, and I'm sitting listening to you talk about your challenges and going, oh my goodness, that's my mum. That's why I could never talk to my mum about such and such. That's why she always did that thing that drove me mad. And yes, I'm on Facebook. I run a group called Winning Women Essex, which is a heart-centered women's business group. And yeah, that's me. So please come and drop me a line. Come and find me. I do discovery calls if you're curious to know more. And I'd love to talk to anyone about this stuff. It's my passion, because I think when we understand our triggers around money and our personality, then we have so much more awareness of what's hitting our buttons. And those buttons being hit can make the difference between us actually going for a job, or putting a program out in the world in our business, or asking for a rise, or putting our fees up. And there can be so much fear of rejection, or really primal stuff that comes from being a smaller child that we just haven't healed. And now is a time, if we understand what's triggering us, we can do some pretty rapid healing on it as well. But the awareness is the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything starts with awareness, doesn't it? Everything starts with awareness. So let me ask you this final question then, Rosemary, if I may, around soulful leaders. What part, having money or a great relationship with money, that's going to help us, isn't it, to become a better, what does the word better, I mean, it's a very subjective term, but, a more powerful or deeper soulful leader. Surely if we've got a great relationship with money, that gives us a lot more power, does it?
Yes, it does. It gives you a lot more awareness, makes you kinder. And yes, but I think relationship with money is one thing, but that your relationship with your money is also ruled by your relationship with yourself. So it really is self-worth and net worth. So how we feel about ourselves is the primary place to start, which comes into the money work I do. And it's very challenging to solve a weight problem if you don't feel better about yourself. If you haven't got that self-love, it's really challenging to sort out money challenges. I've seen this in my life. I've had money challenges. I've resolved them. I come into a lot of money, but because I hadn't healed that part of myself, I've just gone straight into that other pattern. It might have taken me 5 years to do it, but I've had a huge amount of money in my bank account and still had a panic attack about where the next money's coming from, because I haven't resolved my relationship with money. So yes, in answer to your question, a good relationship with money, respectful one, and an understanding one, and one where you understand what you bring into the world and the transformation you bring, what it's worth to people, and the difference it makes to life can make. And that applies to absolutely everyone. I think we're all leaders in our way, but that applies to the people who are doing, the poorly paid work, the carers, because even though they might not get an increase of what they're doing, if you understand your worth, then you can ask for more. You can go for that extra job. You can start your own business. And yes, it definitely comes back to self.
Absolutely. And I just want to pick up the listeners on something by way of coming to a close now, what Rosemary said there. We are all leaders in our own way. Ain't that the truth? Maybe we don't know it quite to the degree that yet, but we are all leaders. We're all soulful leaders to varying degrees, if we choose to be. As you alluded to earlier on, Rosemary, some people might not be choosing to go down that path of being a soulful leader. But my take on it is we're all that. We already are. It's how much we want to open our eyes to the fact and how much we want to embrace that. So, we'll leave it there if we may. Rosemary, as ever, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure.
And listeners, you know what's coming next from a very soulful host. Just to say, remember, the world's changing. How will you respond?
Thanks very much for listening to this World Game Changers podcast episode. Hopefully you found it interesting and helpful. Drop a line to paul@worldgamechangers.org with any thoughts or questions you may have, and he'll be more than happy to respond. Remember, the world is changing. How will you respond?